Hello, everybody. How are you doing today, Saturday or Friday night, depending on where you are watching? It's good to have you on the broadcast. As always, I would love to hear from you in the comments. I would love to hear, as we talk today about connection, what it is that you are really good at. We can learn from each other. I'm going to start doing a series on being a man. Now, that may sound funny to you, but the secret's out. I get phone calls at least once a week from men who are struggling to connect, or from their wives who just wish their husband knew how to connect. And connection, there's many different kinds. Just because your husband can connect at work with the guys on a surface level doesn't mean that he has the ability to connect on a deep level. And so these are things that we are just not taught growing up, or at least most men are not. And what you'll find for you ladies that are watching is that most of these things, I'd say all of these things will actually fit to you and to your situations, or even understanding your dad, your brother, boyfriends, etc. So that's kind of the hope, is that today you will get some tidbits. I have some homework for you. And I would say you've got to turn it in to me. You've got to send me a message. No, you actually don't have to turn it in. But I think it would actually be really good for you to engage in this fully. And I can promise you, I've been a part of men's ministries and church groups where men meet, and it's some of the most awkward. It's more awkward than going to middle school and being the most introverted person in the room who just doesn't feel comfortable talking to people. Because what happens is, for whatever reason, most Christian men are that struggle with some of this connection. And then the thing that happens is most Christian men see a pastor or see someone who's got a charismatic personality, and they think, oh, wow, that guy is amazing. And I was a part of a church where this man really struggled, because he was like, I think my wife likes the pastor more than she likes me. And I just kind of gently put my hand on the guy and said, trust me, your wife is lucky that she's married to you, because he looks great up there, but he can't connect to one-on-one. He can't even connect to his own wife, his children. And that's kind of the cat's out of the bag. So oftentimes that's what we do. That's what we do as men, is, we make these grandiose things. And I know women do this as well, but let's kind of just jump into the teaching. So when it comes to marriage, mutual submission is of the absolute importance. You can go read the book of Ephesians. You can learn about submission. You can go read First Peter 3:1. Talks about all these kind of things. I'm not going to dive into that, because that's something you have to understand. Mutual submission is necessary in a marriage. And what I find over and over again is either the wife can connect really deeply, or the husband can. But many times it's like two trains colliding, and there isn't much connection going on. So that's kind of the secret. Like what they say, what I've heard said a lot of times is, a lot of times single people are dying to be married, and a lot of times married people are dying to be single. So that's just a funny thing to think about. So here's some practical stuff. And I would actually encourage you to write things down. Practice. Now, this seems simple, but it's like one of the most important things. When you go to a new church, when you go to your kids' sporting events, practice. One of the best parts of learning how to communicate is just practice. Smile at somebody. Nod your head, depending on the culture. And again, these things differ depending on the culture, but greet a person as if they were your best friend. And even in your mind, and for you men, think of the people that you love the most. When you're greeting a stranger, when you have that love in your heart and you're greeting someone in that way, they'll actually begin to reciprocate. They won't even know why, but they'll begin to reciprocate because of those things. So smile, say hi, shake their hand, give them a hug, give them a kiss, depending on the culture. One of the things that was funny is when I went to France, I think I got kissed on the cheek. One of my friends had a good laugh with me, and she was like, hey, guess what? There's 30 people coming over, so you're going to get a kiss on each cheek. That's about, 30 times 2. And she was just having a roar because she knew I like to get to know people before I'm, giving them a hug or whatever. But handshakes, that kind of stuff is not a big deal. And so in some cultures, there is a level of intimacy that is different than other cultures. And so, not everything is a black and white thing that fits for everyone. But one of the most important things too is learn to ask questions. I find that whether extrovert or introvert, people struggle to ask good questions. And the only way that you can get better at this is to actually just practice. Somebody's having a conversation about something, whether it's religion, politics, or whatever, like ask them questions. That's how you get to know somebody better. Because if you actually care enough to ask a question, you're going to get deeper into the thing. And you'll find at some point, you'll get to the point where it's like, you can't really ask any more questions. So just move on. But this is something I've actually told people who struggle to ask questions before they go into, this is the thing. If you were going into a job interview and this is a company you want to work for, you have to write down maybe 10 or 15 questions that you want to ask the HR or the person who is representing this company in this situation, because you want to be prepared. And if it's important enough for a job interview, it's important enough in connection. People love to be asked questions, and that's the thing is, especially if you can get them to talk about themselves, especially if they're an extrovert. Most extroverts will not stop talking. So just keep, you could just keep asking them questions and you'll never have to share anything. Like there's some men that have nailed that down. But that's not what we're talking about here. That's not like intimate communication. Okay. The other thing to do, pay attention to body language. What do people do? How are they moving? Do they want to be close? Do they want to be far away? Look at their feet. Look people in the eye. Again, depending on culture. In American culture, look people in the eye. Like, don't stare at them like a psychopath, but look away. Do those kind of things. Pay attention. Are they a kinesthetic person? I worked for a pastor who was the most kinesthetic person I've ever met. We would sit across from the table and he would start slapping the table as we would talk. And I realized I have to bridge the connection with this man, I have to actually touch him back. And so after about the third time of him slapping the table going, Matt, do you understand what I'm talking about? I was like, yes. And it's one of the most awkward things as a man to do, because I'm like, I just wasn't raised like this. I would reach up, touch his hand, and be like, absolutely, I get it. And then from that point forward, this is what his body language would do, because he's leaning forward, he's talking. As soon as I touch his hand, he stops, and he's just like talking like a normal person again, because the connection was actually bridged for him. And then I could relax because I thought like the dude's gonna like jump over the table to like give me a hug and talk to me, right? So these are things that you just need to learn as you go. Like you're not going to know all these kind of tips and tricks, but it's important to pay attention to someone's body language and understand, like sometimes this is actually a good way to communicate, because if you're uncomfortable, this is what they would call self-soothing. If you're like, not everybody is got an open stance. Sometimes this is actually the best way to talk to people. If you're at a party and you have a drink in your hand, if you have something, food in your hand, this is why people do these kind of things, so that they can be comfortable. So that's the other part is, what is it that helps you to be comfortable? But when it comes to good, deep, intimate connection, if this isn't something that you're used to do, you're going to have to make some changes. You're going to have to take some risks. That's the important part to do this. The other thing in regards to questions is you also have to learn to answer questions as well, because that is key in this as well. And we'll talk more about that towards the end. We'll cover that in a later section. Okay, so the next thing you could write down, observe and listen to the person you're talking to, okay? Again, what facial expressions do they make? because as you build rapport with someone, you'll actually find this is so common. I discovered this, and I would read books about these things, watch videos about these things, but I would discover this as I was doing life coaching and counseling with people, or as a pastor when I would meet with people. What happens every single time is, say I start doing this, I actually tested it. People will actually start to mimic your behavior. The other thing you can do to mirror them is if they're doing something, you can mirror their behavior as well. It's actually a subconscious way to connect to somebody. And again, I would find this, I would be sitting there doing counseling or doing a meeting, a pastoral meeting. I cross my legs, the other person would cross their legs. I'd shift to the right, they'd shift to the right. It's crazy what we do without even thinking. So pay attention to those kind of things, and just look at, how does somebody do things, and then how can you connect to them? I think one of the problems is so many times we're thinking like, hey, that person should do all the work. They should connect to me. Some people are like, I'm so important that somebody else should do all the connecting. And some people are like, well, I'm so worthless that nobody would like me. And so we just kind of give up. Those are kind of the two extremes of what happened. And pay attention. Are they a close talker? I one time, and this was kind of mean, but I was in a phase where I was like testing things that I was learning. I was in my 20s and I was at a church meeting and I was talking to this woman, and she was literally like probably this far away from me. And I knew she was kinesthetic. I knew she was like touchy-feely, huggy. And so what I did is I actually, as we were talking face to face, I would take a step. She would take a step. I would take a step. And she's telling me a story. And the whole time I spun her completely around. She had no idea that I did it. And I realized she was so into her story, and so engaged. And I was actually engaged in what she was saying. I found it really interesting. But she was so engaged and she felt so connected telling her story that I was able to actually spin her around the room without her realizing it. So that's the part where like, hey, this is actually working. I'm actually connecting with this person on a heart-to-heart level, not on a head level. And this is the thing. Many men can tell you stories, and even women, they can tell you boring stories about what they ate for lunch, what they did yesterday. And it's all data-driven stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about getting to the heart level of communication. The other thing to ask yourself when you're talking to someone is, what are they not saying? This is a huge one that a lot of times people don't think about. Now, it doesn't mean everybody's hiding something or some of those kind of things, but sometimes people just don't talk about certain topics, like, for example, politics. Do I really want to know what everyone's political beliefs are? Absolutely not. Do I want to know everybody's religious beliefs? No, absolutely not. Those are things that if I get to know you, sure, I'd love to talk about. But there's just some things that people don't talk about because of culture, because of how they were raised. So it's important in those kind of situations just to pay attention. What subjects do people avoid? And if you want to connect to somebody, poking and prodding into some deep, dark thing that somebody's not willing to address, that's probably not going to help you at all. That's not going to help you connect. In fact, that person will run from you. I've worked with plenty of addicts over the years, and I've noticed that people who grow up in dysfunctional homes, who have a lot of shame, if you start asking questions about those things, they'll actually start to pull back and they'll just completely disappear out of your life. And so that's the thing. Even if like they're using in some way, that's the thing. It's just instinctive for them to go, uh-oh, someone's exposing me. I'm out of here. So that's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about when somebody's not talking about some area of their life to just start poking and prodding. But pay attention to what people, what they do and do not say. The other thing is this person an introvert? Are they an extrovert? Are they an ambivert? An ambivert is kind of a mix of both. And does this person even know which they are? This is another part. Pay attention. What is their love language? Is it gift giving? I used to have this guy friend, and I'll be honest with you, it kind of like, I just thought it was weird. He was an excellent mechanic. He was excellent with his hands, but he would just randomly buy me gifts. And I would make jokes with him. I'd be like, dude, are we like dating? What's going on? And he because back then I didn't understand that giving gifts is a love language. And from man to man, if my, they always say it's better to give than receive. Well, in that case, like, I did not want to be the receiver. It made me uncomfortable because it felt too intimate to me. Now, I didn't know that when it was happening. All I knew is like, oh, this is uncomfortable. What is this guy doing? But later I figured out, oh, this is one of the love languages. His love language was giving gifts. Okay. Now I'm happy to receive gifts. Like, I love gifts because sometimes you have to force yourself to, like, just say thank you. Like, if you're someone who feels uncomfortable in those situations, sometimes the best thing you can do is just go, thank you so much for this gift. It takes practice. All these things take practice. Do they have the gift of service? This same friend, he was more than happy if I had something that needed to be fixed. He could not say no. Now, that was a kind of a broken part of him where his gift of service was out of whack. But do they have the gift of service? Are they the kind of person that just enjoys serving other people? Is it time? Is it touch? Is it words of affirmation? Man to man, we don't usually go, so, hey, dude, what's your 5 love language, bro? But you can pick these things up just by paying attention to them. You can even ask if they're married or they have a girlfriend, like, hey, so, what do you do for your wife? You could even ask the question, which is probably safer to say, hey, what's your wife's love language? How do you connect to your wife? Because honestly, most men would go, huh? What? They have no idea what their wife's love language is, right? And why that is they have no idea that they have a love language either. The other thing is, what are your spiritual gifts? One of the things that I've found over the last 20 years is when I ask this question, what are your spiritual gifts? Most people have no clue. 1 Corinthians 12, Romans 12, Ephesians 4:3, like, those are where most of the gifts in the Bible are. Most people have no idea what spiritual gifts are. I've asked people, hey, I asked one guy friend, what's your spiritual gift? He's like, eating and drinking beer. Or my spiritual gift is like moving furniture. That's an ability. That's a talent. Some are better than others, but find out what their spiritual gifts are. And if you can recognize them as a man, call them out in your friends, like, hey, you seem to really be gifted at this. You seem to, really have this ability. And then kind of explain it to them, because again, most people don't understand these things, but this is another way to connect with people. Now, again, this isn't on the deepest level, but this is a way to get into more intimate and deeper kind of conversations with people, right? So the other thing is a huge one for your own personal growth. Like, observe how people, what they do at work. How do they raise their kids? If they're married, if they have a boyfriend, girlfriend, like, how do they interact in these situations? It's really important to observe those things. If you've grown up in a dysfunctional home, or maybe kind of a half dysfunctional home, these things are not going to be things that are normal for you. So you have to observe and then copy behavior. I've learned, like, some of the best parenting techniques from some of the most screwed up people that I've ever met, because here's the thing, like, they've got, like, their kids are very successful. They're 4-point student. One kid is, I remember these boys that I was mentoring, and the boys were like 4-point students. The marriage was nothing. Like, when I looked at the marriage, I was like, eh. When I looked at how they, like, lived their Christian life, I was like, eh. But that's the thing, is it doesn't matter. You can go, hey, how do I take the good things out of these and go, hey, I want to apply that to my life. That's what part of this observing, and then just, making these things applicable to your life. And then what I would do is that I would follow up with them, and I would ask them questions like, hey, so I've noticed that you do this with your son or your daughter. Tell me more. Where did you learn this? How, and compliment them when you're asking questions like, hey, you're really, really good at this. You've done a good job raising your kids. Like, tell me more about this. Sometimes people can't actually answer the question. And the reason they can't is because they grew up in a somewhat healthy, home, or in this area of their life was pretty healthy. And so it's just natural for them. But most people will be able to go, well, hey, I intentionally made this decision with my son to do this, or with my other son in this way, or my daughter. Those things are all important. So observation is really good, but then you have to ask the follow-up questions. And trust me, if you tell somebody, especially a man, like, hey, you're a really good dad. You're a really good husband. Guys are just going to be like, huh, yeah. And then as you ask more questions, they're going to be happy because you've opened up the conversation by complimenting them, by telling them the truth, and it's just automatically connecting. So that's one of the ways to connect with somebody, and you find out a lot of information, and sometimes they'll actually ask it back. So it's good, again, for you to have the answers, yourself. And this is the thing. It could be someone who's a great entrepreneur. One of the things before I started a life coaching business years ago, I talked to every entrepreneur I could. I talked to, small business owners. I would find all this information out. And it was so funny because this one guy, he said, just go open a bank account. That's all you need to do. And he was very, very successful. And I just laughed at him. I was like, all these people talked about a business plan and all these other kind of things. And he's like, yeah, that's all good, but just go take the first step. And that's what I'm telling you tonight or today is many times you just have to go take the first step with these kind of things and just practice. So here's the big one for most men. And this is probably true for most people. You have to actually take time to get to know yourself. I think that's one of the bigger struggles. And I think a lot of people spend a lot of time avoiding themselves and who they are. But it's really important. One of the things that I've tried to do is be a lifelong learner. From the time I was 20 years old, I've been trying to grow in different ways. It doesn't mean I'm perfect. It doesn't mean I don't have issues, but I'm always trying to read. I'm always trying to watch videos, things that interest me. And then many times even things that just don't interest me because I'm like, hey, I need to learn and hear from voices that, maybe I won't agree with. One of the things that I did, and this is kind of a little bit of a rabbit trail, but it gives you an idea, is when it came to theology, when it came to the Bible, I had what I believed, and then I would hear these alternate or things that I thought were like just not from God. And so what I did is I actually started interviewing people who believed differently than me. And I didn't tell them what I believed. I didn't push what I believed down their throat. I was just like, hey, so teach me, why do you believe this? And I remember in one situation, I asked this friend, I go, hey, so on topic A, would you be willing to read the Bible and what it actually says about this topic? And my friend said, yeah, absolutely. So we opened the Bible up. We actually read it, out loud. And I said, does that change your opinion on this topic? And my friend was like, absolutely not. And this was a person with a master's degree, with a theological degree from a major university, and who was a reverend or a pastor. And they were like, no, because they were like, I believe this, which it had nothing to do with the Bible. But for me, it helped me to understand. I was like, oh, well, this isn't a Bible believing Christian, which is fine. That was their thing. But it helped me to get to deeper with the person. And then it actually helped me to connect with this person on a deeper level, because then I was able to go, hey, well, so tell me some of the authors you read. And even though most of the books that my friend recommended, I read them, it actually, I would say I became an expert on this certain topic, but I began to understand the way that other people think, which was very, very different for me. And it actually gave me compassion and empathy. And it helped me to relate to people who think differently than me. And I know a lot of people don't take the time to do that because most people are happy to just go, this is the way it is, right? But you don't have to be that way, right? You can learn from other people. And I think that's the important thing too, is when you're taking time to get to know yourself, learn from other people who completely disagree with you. The other thing that's important, take a class. There's so many free things online nowadays, or cheap online classes, or read a book together with a friend or with your spouse, and then ask questions. Some of those things are really, really simple things that you can do. They just take time, and anybody can read a chapter of a book a day. It's actually really, really easy. And with Zoom, and it's funny how, with the way things are in the world right now, you can connect with anybody, anywhere, anytime over, a video call. So that's the other thing. Next thing, ask yourself, what do I believe and why do I believe it? If most people would actually take the time and look at that, they would be shocked at what they believe. One of the things that I found interesting as I got deeper and deeper into relationship with Jesus is I was like, why do I believe this? Where did this come from? I wasn't raised in a Christian home. My family were not Christians. Where did I come up with this religious mindset? And I found, like, I think some of it's cultural, some of it's, from spiritual places. But I was like, it was just crazy. Some of the things that I believed that I had to unlearn. And this is the part about getting to know yourself that's so important. Because if you start to learn, why do I believe what I believe? And then why? And then look at, where do these beliefs come from? And don't just do it with religion. Do it with every area of your life. Do it with how you handle money. Do it with intimacy. And when I say intimacy, it has nothing to do with sex. I'm talking about intimately connecting heart to heart with other people. Like, what do you actually believe about these things? Are you in self-protection mode? Are you in survival mode? Those are things that you can come out of, but it's going to take time. Pay attention to how you physically feel in situations. If you are a feeler, that's one thing, but just in general, as a man, how do you feel in certain situations? One of the things that I forced myself to do is I would put myself into situations that I was completely uncomfortable with. This may actually shock you, but when I would speak in front of people, I would be so nervous and so uncomfortable that many times I was just like, on the inside. And I forced myself to do it because I knew at some point I was going to be teaching, preaching, kind of doing these kind of things. But it was not something that I felt comfortable. The way your brain works, the way neurochemistry of the brain, the way your subconscious, your conscious works, the more you do something and the more that you do it well, you'll actually gain confidence in it. It's just like riding a bike. Eventually, as you have success after success after success, it becomes easier to do it. And that's the thing is, you don't always have to know where the fear comes from, but sometimes you have to actually put yourself into situations that are uncomfortable so you can grow. And that's the way it is with relationships and getting to know yourself. As I said before, practice, practice, practice. It's so important when you're building relationships. Here's another thing I kind of talked about this in the very beginning. Over time, I've seen some people who seem to connect really, really well in public, who are actually awful dads, awful husbands, okay? Or the flip side, they are the most amazing dad, they're the most amazing husband, but they just struggle to connect in person. And I find this in ministry. It's actually, like, I could name many interesting people that you would know who they are. And some of them are horrible at one-on-one conversations. I remember in this large church, it was one of the fastest growing churches in America that was around here. And my friend served at that church. And every time he would run into this pastor, who is this amazing, dynamic, like, awesome speaker, every time he'd run into him in the hall, and it would be this, he said it was the most awkward moment of his entire life. And my friend was awesome at connecting to people, but the pastor would like look down and wouldn't even look at him because the pastor was so uncomfortable one-on-one because he had never developed himself. And that's the thing that I'm talking about here is development is so important in these situations. I can think of another pastor. I was interning at this church, again, 10,000 or more people at this church, and I'm interning, and I walk in, and this is the funny thing. I walk into the office, the secretary, nicest lady, how are you doing? She doesn't know me at all, but she's a complete extrovert. She's a perfect administrative, secretary person, like answering the phone, super connective. And as I'm walking through the building, I'm walking past every pastor. I'm walking by every person that works there. And it's really funny because I'm like, wow, why is this place like a ghost town? And then here comes the senior pastor. Again, same thing, head down, doesn't make eye contact. And it would be easy for me to say, the dude was kind of like a skinny jean wearing kind of sissy. But that doesn't help anything. You have to go, well, why is this guy this way? Well, he was an extreme introvert. He just happened to be a good speaker. He happened to be able to connect to people in an audience from a stage, but he was horrible at connecting. And he was a good dad and he was a good husband. But many times what happens for most men is we have an experience like that. We feel rejected. And then we're like, oh, all blah, 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 or like that. Or we think, oh, there's something wrong with me. That's, I think, what too many men, and of course women do too, is we think, oh, there's something wrong with me. The pastor didn't greet me. It's like, no, this guy is a complete introvert and he feels more awkward than you do when you walk by him. And it was funny, as I'm walking through, there's a husband and wife worship team leader, and both of them, like complete extroverts, are like, hey, so glad you're at the church, and greeting me like a normal person would if you came into your home. But that's the thing I think that's key, is many times we feel rejection, and then it's easy to label somebody else instead of just going, you know what, maybe this person's having a bad day. Maybe they're just not able to connect in the same way that I can. And sometimes if you have a bone to pick, sometimes you look for trouble in those situations. Or like I said, if you're somebody who easily gets rejected, it's just like, oh, that's another person that doesn't like me. And that's just not true. And so we have to stop believing the lies. Okay. So the most important thing, though, is that you challenge yourself to grow. You put yourself in these kind of situations that you will actually grow. Most things don't grow in the dark by themselves in a cave. I know there's probably a couple of you men watching that, like, you are introverted. You don't like reaching out to connect. It feels absolutely horrific. But the fact is, you need it and other people need you. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing that sometimes we forget. I've had friends call me in the last month. They're like, hey, I'm lonely. I'm not seeing all my friends doing the same things that we've normally done. And I said to one of my friends, I was like, hey, I love you. Thank you so much for telling me you're lonely. And it was actually a really deep connecting point between the two of us, because, most men aren't just going to come out and say, hey, I'm struggling. But it's something that needs to happen. It's something that men need to do. And again, men, stop thinking that other men are better than you. If other men are like a better father than you, or if they're a better spiritual leader, or if they're healthier than you, or they're a better athlete than you, like, the chances are you're probably better than them at other things. Ask them how they got to be such a good whatever. That's the part of being vulnerable. That's the part of connecting. And as I said before in this broadcast, that's where most people, like, they love to be asked questions. So do it. I can sit there with somebody, go for an hour-long walk, or be on the phone and just ask questions, and people will just for the most part, because people love to talk, and it's a good way to get to know somebody. So stop thinking everyone's better than you, or stop thinking like, oh, this person, he's better at me than this. Then if that's true, ask them how they got there, and then learn from them, and then go do some of the things that they've done, and then adapt it to you and your personality and your love language and all those kind of things. And so that you can connect your kids, your grandkids, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing to keep in mind too, some men, some women just naturally know how to connect because they grew up in a healthy home. And this is one of the funniest things I discovered, is that you ask people, like, teach me, how is it that you're able to intimately connect with other people? And they're like, they don't know, because it's natural for them, because they saw a healthy relationship between their mom and dad. They had a healthy relationship with their siblings, and it's just natural for them to do it. They have to actually start to think and to process, well, how did this even happen? And how did I get here? Because they grew up in a decent family. And I used to always joke, a non-dysfunctional home is like the Easter Bunny. It just doesn't exist. But I can promise you, I've actually met people who don't have, they didn't grow up in a dysfunctional home. But I can tell you, most of the people that have learned to do these things, it's through hard work and dedication, and just choosing to be a lifelong learner. That's the other thing. Here's a big one. You could write this down. Initiation. Someone has to do it. It might as well be you. Okay. We can say we're an introvert. We can make excuses, that we just don't do that. But initiation is one of the most important things when it comes to connecting, because someone has to start it. Someone has to start the conversation. Now, if you are an extreme introvert, if you are someone who, cringes at the thought of talking to a stranger or going to a public meeting with other people or whatever it is, I'm not saying go do it all the time, but you have to occasionally put yourself in these situations. And then after you do it, evaluate it. It's like, was that really so bad to go talk to a stranger? Was it really so bad to say hi? some of these things are very simple. Go to the mall. I mean, it's much harder with lockdown, but just smile at people. Nowadays, take off your mask and smile at someone and say hi. It's crazy, like where we've gotten to. But some of these simple gestures will go a long way with people. And when you ask somebody, men, when you ask somebody how they're doing, we're all trained to go, yeah, I'm good. Right. But then you have to ask more specific. Hey, how's your marriage? How's, how's your secret life going? Sometimes you have to go a little bit deeper. And this is the thing with most men. Most men will not ask a question about something they're struggling with. This is what I've seen over and over again. This is why so many men resist any kind of like accountability or any kind of growth, is because it's this shame mentality of like, oh, I can't let anybody know this. When most men know full well that other men are struggling with the exact same things, or if they're not currently, they have in the past. And that's a good question to say, hey, so are you struggling with this right now? If not, like, hey, tell me, how did you actually overcome this? Or where did you gain some success in these areas? But again, what happens is most men are too afraid to ask that because it feels too intimate. It feels too connecting, and it's scary. But that's the part where, you have to learn to initiate conversation. I was really proud of one of my kids because I said to one of my kids, I said, hey, you're old enough now that even though this is super uncomfortable, you're old enough now to ask an adult because of a situation. You're old enough to ask the adult this specific question about what's going on and why this decision was made that affects you and affects some things in your life. And so one of my kids says, okay, well, I'll go do this. And I said, and keep in mind, I said this to my kid because I'm teaching my kids this too. I'm like, pay attention to their body language when you ask them this question, because I can promise you, because I knew spiritually that this person was going to be way more uncomfortable than my child, because my child is an extrovert. And so my child goes up and says, hey, I have this question for you. Do you have a minute? And the coach is like super uncomfortable. And, my child starts asking these questions, and the person, answers the questions. And then my child's like, thank you so much, because I said, hey, good news, bad news, it doesn't matter. Just say thank you to what they tell you. And the fact that my child was able to observe this adult's behavior, it actually helped my child to go, hey, you know what? This was actually an enjoyable experience, and I could actually do this again, because my child doesn't need me to do everything for them. And this is the problem for a lot of men, is we just never learn these things. You either have to learn it when you're at work, but the problem is sometimes we survive at work, we learn these techniques or things to do at work. We become a manager, we become the boss, or we just start our own business. And then other people have to kind of suffer under us because we don't know how to communicate, and we don't even realize it. So that's the thing is, practice, practice, practice. The other part about getting to know yourself is sometimes you got to ask difficult questions. So here's your homework. This is what I want you to do. If you're a man, and if you're a woman watching this, you can do this as well, or you can share this with a man and give them a challenge. Most men love a challenge, but this is, part of me wants to say this is a simple thing, but I realize it's not, because here's your homework. This is what I want you to do. I want you to gather 3 of your friends. And this is the difficult thing, is most men don't even have 3 friends. It's the way we've been socialized. It's just life. And so if you're a guy and you don't have any friends, or if you have one friend, like, now is the time to really reach out. Now is the time to actually change that, because you do need friends. And there's plenty of men that need your friendship as well. I actually said to a recent friend, I said, I was connecting with the husband and wife, and I just said, hey, you're awesome, but I want to connect to your husband. I want to get to know him, because it's just so much, it's important for us guys, because most guys don't even have 3 friends. And wives, don't go, you already know the answer to this. You already know if your husband has any friends. But this is what I want you to do. Here's your homework. Ask them, what are your top 5 strengths? So go to your best friend. Even if your best friend is like, he hasn't grown in the last 20 years, and you have, they will answer this question honestly. Ask them, what do you see as my five, as my top 5 strengths? Okay. So start with there. Everybody loves a positive answer, and if they're your friends, they might give you a hard time, but start there and then go to the other side and say, hey, so now tell me, if you were to pick any 3 things that I need to work on, what would it be? Okay. And, depending on how long you've known this person, they may or may not be fully honest with you, because as men, you got to find that man that's like brutally honest. Because some men, if they have that pastoral personality and, they easily connect on a surface level to everyone, they'll be like, oh, you're great, there's nothing wrong with you. And deep down, there's like some things that, really bother you. And in this process, if some personal things come out, it actually may be an opportunity for you to just apologize for something you've done to one of your friends that you may not even be aware of. But again, ask 3 of your friends 2 questions. What are my top 5 strengths, and what are my top 3 weaknesses? Okay. This is a good test for being vulnerable. This is a good test for, intimacy. And then if you're married, after you get this data, take it to your spouse and say, hey, what do you think about this information? Or if you're not married, take it to another friend and say, hey, what do you think about this information? And process it. Don't just take the information, write it down, and then never look at it again. Decide like, hey, out of these, like you would basically have, 9 weaknesses, pick a couple and go, hey, these are something I'd like to work on. But then when it comes to the strengths, you could also work on your strengths as well. So pick one of your strengths and go, hey, I want to actually be better at this. Even though my friend said I'm great at it, I want to actually become better at it. So don't just focus on your weakness, because that never helps. And as I said, gather it all, talk to your spouse about it, and celebrate your strengths, because many people, it depends on personality type. Some people are happy to celebrate their strengths to the point where it bugs everyone around them. But most men, I think, secretively struggle with certain things, and then they just don't tell anybody. And so that's the thing, is it's a great way to say to your spouse, like, hey, do you think this is actually true? And it's a great way for your spouse to actually validate you. And then for you as a man to go, hey, you know what? Like, I really love this about you. I love this about you. I love this about you. It's a great way for you to connect on a deep level. And when you get the negative list, ask yourself, is it something practical that can be dealt with easily? Is it going to take seeing a counselor, seeing a pastor, learning something new? Is it a quirk? Is it something from childhood? Is it due to a belief system? Begin to unpack and go through the layers and ask this with somebody else. There are many people gifted and talented at helping other people grow. And that's what we're all here for. And you don't need to pay thousands of dollars to go see a counselor or whatever. In most of these situations are pretty simple. If you will just go, hey, you know what? This is my issue. And now I got to figure out how to do the opposite of whatever it is, and learn how to connect. So that's it for today's teaching. I hope this has helped. I hope this has blessed you. I hope you've gotten a few nuggets. But again, the most important thing is just go practice these things. I'm going to do some follow-up videos in the next couple of weeks. I'm going to address some men issues like pornography, going deeper into intimacy, and just dealing with things that you don't hear people at church talk about, because people don't want to talk about things that are uncomfortable. And I'm happy to talk about uncomfortable things. So it's really, these are really, really important things that need to be addressed. And unfortunately, just too many people struggle with and go throughout their life and never get answers for them. And one of the things I'll actually talk about in the next video is how to actually connect to your kids, and how to connect to your wife, but specifically your children. What are some things you can do spiritually? What are things you can do emotionally to develop your kids? 0 to 12 is really, really important. It's, from a Jewish perspective, it's called the age of directives. So it's kind of like mom and dad are God and are directing their children. And so that's the most important thing. That's where, like, there are some parents who their kids are 30 years old still living at home, and they don't understand, like, why are my kids still struggling? Why are they not successful? It's because, unfortunately, they didn't do their job when your kids were young. And I can promise you it's never too late. It doesn't matter if your kid is 30. you can still help them move along. It doesn't matter if your kid just graduated from high school, if they're 40, 50 years old. Even if you're an older parent, the other thing you can do is you can do these things with your grandkids where, I had one friend who he looked at his grandkids and he said, hey, I can see my sin. I can see my mistakes manifesting in my own grandkids. And I said, hey, that's awesome that you are that vulnerable and honest, that you realize and you take responsibility that's yours. But guess what? You see it, you can actually fix it through connecting and through kind of, helping them to process this stuff so that it doesn't have to continue. And that's the biggest thing, is everything is fixable. God is able to do anything, anytime, anywhere. Sometimes it's just education. Sometimes it's taking a risk. But most of the time it's initiation. And that's what most people are afraid to do. They're afraid to just take the first step. Like my friend in business said, I had all these amazing entrepreneurs tell me all these amazing things. And my friend was like, hey, just go start a bank account. Sometimes it's the most simple step that leads to another step and another one and another one. And sooner or later, you're flying. So God bless you guys. Have a great rest of your day or evening. And we'll catch you on the next broadcast on Friday, where we'll talk about connecting with your kids and your